But also at the same time, there's less competitions. Like, there's more opportunity for you to be a part of different competitions, but there are other competitions that are being cancelled. So it's a changing landscape, I find. Yeah.
I'll go even more broader than that. One of the biggest changes I've seen, like, even in recent years, but there was a particular shift about 10 years ago, is the general public, particularly in Australia, became a lot more accepting of cosplay. So it became a lot easier to cosplay in public, and people know what it is, and they start recognizing the characters because anime has hit mainstream media, same with gaming. It's not as like taboo, like you're not the nerdy person as much anymore. Yeah, so it's really good to see that it's gotten such like a positive, association over the years.
So Knite mentioned TikTok. Do you think that social media has had a positive impact on cosplay?
Yes.
I'm 50-50 on that one. Honestly speaking, I think there's definitely good and bad when it comes to social media. It's definitely kind of pushed cosplay into a more normalized thing, I would say. Before, I guess most people these days would post on Instagram, Twitter, but back then we had websites, we would post them on blogs and on World Cosplay, which doesn't exist, it still exists, but that's a very old website no one uses anymore. So I'd say the community in general was a lot more smaller back then, but now because of social media, it gives people the opportunity to post their creations online and then everyone can see it. It's much more accessible.
The communities that used to exist in the past were very sort of tight-knit, and you had to go out of your way to actually search for that thing. And now they're so publicly available to any random person who is not a cosplayer themselves or isn't really familiar with cosplay. There's going to be bad things about that. I think it's overall positive though, that it's just being shown to a wider audience.
Kirilee, do you have an opinion on that?
I think that social media is going to be more and more relevant as we move forward. I think that overall it has served the community in a more positive light than a negative light, but I will say that it has also had its negative space as well, because you generally see only the finished costumes that people post and the most beautiful photographs. And so, when you're comparing yourself, especially when you're starting out, to these cosplayers with their finished costume, their beautiful photos, it can be demoralizing. And I hate that. I'm very much like, anyone can cosplay, and don't worry if it's not perfect the first time, you're amazing.
Do each of you have a preference on a platform for sharing your costumes?
So what I've kind of noticed is that different people use different platforms. So particularly what I've noticed is Instagram is very popular in Australia at the moment. So I feel like I connect most with friends in Australia and fans in Australia by using Instagram. But say the Southeast Asia region is still very heavily using Facebook. Twitter is used by a really broad range of people. It's hard to narrow that one down, and TikTok's a bit similar to Twitter in that way. So it's hard for me to choose a favorite one. They all have good and bad things about them. I guess I kind of like platforms that focus more on the image side, since I'm not a very video heavy person. But yeah, I appreciate the features of each one.
Yeah, I really agree. It's very broad. Same thing in Instagram. I would say most of my Australian followers are on there, as well as mix of Asia followers and Europe as well. But yeah, definitely I use Twitter a lot more for my Japanese followers, because Twitter in Japan is one of the main SNS platforms that they use. And then yeah, Facebook is mostly Asia fan base there. So it really depends on what market I guess you're wanting to hit, or where your followers are from. But I think all of the social media have they're all different, but all in good ways. Because I prefer Facebook because I get to post my full albums on there, like from photo shoots. Whilst with Instagram, there's only a limit of 10 photos that you can post per time. So it really depends on like what you're wanting to show to your audience. Yeah.
So for me, I've got three: Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. YouTube is probably the one that I most use because it is a source of revenue for myself. For me, how I'm known in the community is I know that people know my videos, my tutorials, that sort of thing. So YouTube is probably the most important platform for myself, probably then followed by Instagram because of the photos, and then lastly Facebook.
So you spoke about the different social media platforms that are more prevalent in other countries. How does the Australian cosplay scene compare to international?
I would say, just because with my work I tend to travel a lot overseas to different countries and like different conventions and stuff, and I've kind of seen what all these different countries have to offer. I think Australia, in terms of the overall cosplay community, is quite good, but there is also so many things that we can learn from these other countries, specifically with things like competitions or just the overall treatment of cosplayers in terms of work. Yeah, I don't know, there's a lot of things that I think we can learn from these other countries, but for me it's specifically the competitions because they are so grand and really praised upon, and I wish we could bring more of that into Australian community. Yeah.
So what I've seen from overseas and comparing to Australia, I think that Australia has like the most talented costumers out of any country. For the amount of people we have in our community, we are insanely good, and we should recognise like how talented our community is. Not that there's, not talented people overseas. There are many, there are many talented people overseas as well, but we have just got like an insanely high standard here. Yeah, so props to everyone in Australia.
Look, I would agree with that, except for I would also add Denmark and Germany to that list. Denmark and Germany and Sweden have a very amazing kind of craftsmanship within those countries. I don't know why, it's something in the water, but I would agree with that. I would say for the community that we have in Australia, we have such amazing talent, which is just beautiful. It's amazing. But what I would love to see, like Knite said, is the cosplay competitions. They're like, don't get me wrong, we do what we can and we're amazing at what we do here in Australia, but there are some amazing competitions that I think we could learn from.
Do you think it's because in Australia we've been without the kind of resources that a lot of the rest of the world have had, that we've had to sort of hone the skills that we can?
I don't think it's so much resources that are the issue in Australia. So say like in Europe and America, they just have a lot more exposure to each other.
And a lot more numbers. And a lot more numbers as well. Like there's a lot more physical people cosplaying at a particular level.
Yeah, so yeah, there's just like a lot more skill sharing in that regard, and you are able to see so many more different points of view and ideas. So we're a bit stuck over here. Unless you go out of your way to look for it online, you're not really going to see much else than, the pool we have here.
Can I also just jump in there and just be all like, people from Perth, all right? We're basically a country upon our own. Like it's I'm going to say this right. Perth, it is so hard. It is so hard. You think it's hard here? It's hard in Perth because literally we have to travel a minimum of 3 hours by air to get to another major city within Australia. So that's Adelaide, all right? And then Melbourne is a little bit further. Sydney is a 5-hour flight. And it costs a pretty penny, guys. It really does. And so we have a little less. As anyone who's living in Perth will know, we have even less opportunity. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things. Like I feel that 100% in my heart what you just said.
So